Kim, and I am a horrible millennial mom. Here on The Horrible Millennial Mom, I talk about what it's like to try to raise a young Catholic family while being a spiritually immature Catholic myself. Today, we are going to be talking all about novenas, what they are, how to pray them, why to pray them. So simply put, a novena is just a 9-day period of intense prayer. And typically during this 9-day period, you have a specific prayer intention, or you're praying for specific graces or for resolution in an issue, and you just focus very intensely for those 9 days. So typically novenas, when you're praying a novena, there's a sense of urgency or a desperate need. So this is a very special kind of prayer that we aren't praying often. So novena comes from the word novem, which is Latin for 9. That's 9. And it symbolizes the 9 days that we're in that intense prayer. Aside from that, there isn't else that we really know about when or how or why we started praying novenas. So again, since novenas are meant to be done with urgency and for a very special intentions in dire situations, there are some novenas that are extremely popular. Some of those being St. Jude, because St. Jude, of course, is the patron saint of difficult cases and of dire situations. And there are lots of novenas that are very popular with Mama Mary, the Miraculous Medal, the Immaculate Conception. And again, these are just specific novenas that focus heavily on who we're asking for the help. So hold up, before we go any further, let's just clear up a common Catholic myth. We are not praying to these saints, right? So a lot of novenas have specific saints attached to them, and we are not praying to these saints because we as Catholics do not believe that these saints are in any way on any level with God, and they cannot grant us any prayers or any wishes. But instead what we're doing is we're praying for their prayers. So we are really just essentially asking them to pray for us, asking them if they could just like nudge on Jesus a little, whisper in his ear a little on our behalf. Because we know that these saints, although they're in heaven, they cannot grant us any prayers or any wishes. They are not God. So we are just asking for their intercession. We're just asking for their help. So, all that being said, for anybody out there who thinks that Catholics pray to saints, we do not. But many of the most popular novenas are prayed for the help of specific saints. And for good reason, because some of these saints have really great relationships with God that we don't yet have, right? And again, they are not God at all, but we can acknowledge that some of these men and women were way holier than us, and that perhaps they can teach us something about prayer, right? The same way I, as a mom, hope to teach my babies about prayer because I've lived a little longer and maybe I know a little something. So, we rely on the saints to be those role models for us. And so we ask for their intercession and we ask for their prayers, acknowledging that they know a little more than us, that they are, well, I can admit that they're all holier than me. I'm still figuring this out. So I very much appreciate their prayers and their help. I very much need their prayers and their help. So along with the entire notion that, we have to be careful to know that we are praying for saints to help us and not praying to the saints, There's another little issue that we have to be careful of when we're praying novenas, and that's taking them to be superstitious. Kind of remembering what they actually are, because novenas have their own set of rules, right? So if you're praying this novena, there are some novenas that you have to pray at certain times a day, or pray a certain amount of times a day. And so a great example of this is my favorite example of this, is that I was praying the St. Jude novena, and part of the novena, so I found a sheet of paper at church, right, and it had the prayer on it, and it said, St. Jude novena, and then at the very bottom it said, for 9 days make 9 copies of this prayer and leave 9 copies in church each of the days, or whatever. And I got kind of obsessive with making sure that I got to church every day of those 9 days, that I made 9 copies, that I placed these 9 papers where they were supposed to go, because suddenly I got wrapped up on this idea of my prayer intention is not going to be answered if I don't do all these little steps. And it wasn't until like halfway through this novena that I'm explaining, my husband and I had dinner plans, or plans to go visit friends, and I was just like, okay, but I have to center my day around making sure that I just get to church to leave these novenas, and my husband he was just like, what? And so I explained it to him, and he said to me, isn't that just like a Catholic version of a chain letter? And he made me stop and think about it. Like, everyone's got to remember those email chain letters where it's just like, or like Facebook posts where it's like, share this. Well, I remember the chain emails, but it's kind of like, forward this to 10 people or you'll have bad luck or whatever. And those were super popular when I was still young and dumb. So I forwarded it to 10 people because then I would have bad luck. And when my husband said that, it made me stop and think, like, oh yeah, like I'm treating this like a superstition. Like, I'm treating this like, if I don't do every single step exactly the way it's meant to be, then my wish won't come true. But if I do, then my wish is supposed to come true, right? Totally missing the point of the novena, which is just to bring my special intention before the Lord, right? And yes, of course, we are, it's 9 days of intense prayer, so you best show up for those 9 days and do the praying. But ultimately, it's up to the Lord how he answers that prayer intention. And I'm just, carving out a period to really focus on this prayer intention and pray deeply for this prayer intention. But no amount of getting to church and making copies and doing a headstand for 30 seconds and, writing it in a sand pit, like, none of those things are all just extras, And for the St. Jude prayer, and specifically for anyone who's done that one where you leave some in church, it's really just about spreading it, it's about spreading the devotion and the awareness of the St. Jude prayer. I don't think St. Jude is up there counting them, saying, oh man, she only copied 7 this time. Guess I'm not praying for her today. So we have to be wary of that. We have to be cognizant of that. And we have to remember that novenas are not supposed to be this superstitious magic spell to get our wishes granted, right? They are prayers. We bring it back. They are prayers. They're meant for us to focus. And the reason why we focus heavily for 9 days is hopefully so that we're also opening our heart and mind to how God wants to answer that special intention, right? So we're focusing on it, we're bringing it to God, we're asking for a saint's prayer intention, but not just so that this magical thing can happen and so our wish can come true, but so that our hearts can be open and changed by the will of God for that intention in our life. Super important. We have to always, always, always remember that. and not get caught up in I have to do it exactly the same way for 9 days so that my wish can come true. Not what that is, not at all. And lastly, to go off that last point about making sure that we're not using novenas to grant our wishes, it's also really important. And I'm saying this because I often need to remind myself that we don't go into novenas hoping for one answer and then deciding that the novena failed, and novenas don't work if we don't get that answer, because that's not how God works. Now, I say that because I often need to remind myself. So, just to share a few experiences that I've had with novenas that have both been answered the way I wanted them to be and answered in ways that I hadn't wanted them to be, but answered nonetheless. So, a novena favorite of mine is St. Joseph, because St. Joseph is awesome. And I'm talking St. Joseph, married to Mama Mary, part of the Holy Family. That's St. Joseph. So the very first time I ever prayed for St. Joseph's prayers was my husband and I moved out of state, away from our family, and we had our first, who was less than 2, I think would have been turning, yeah, she was a few months from being 2, and I was 8 months pregnant with our second. And we moved to an area where we knew no one, totally starting over, starting from scratch, and we were just dirt poor for months. And so I looked up who is the patron saint of financial difficulties or employment issues, because I was really just hoping for some sort of financial relief. I did want to go back to work, but the situation had to be just right for me to be able to go back to work, because we had 2 kids and we could not afford traditional daycare because my husband was not making that much. There was no way I was going to find a job making that much. So it had to be just right. So found St. Joseph, who is the patron saint of unemployment, well, for employment issues. And also, he's just an awesome saint in general. And I really felt called to him during this time, because there are some, when Mama Mary was pregnant with Jesus, he had to pick up and leave. And for those whole, the whole first part of the Gospels, we know that he had to pick up and leave with them so many times, leaving everything behind, just listening to that voice of God. And so I've really felt drawn to him and needing his prayers and intercessions as a role model to teach me to have that same trust in God. And so I said this novena to him, and bam, like within a few weeks of that constant pressing for his prayers and kind of getting his shove into Jesus, I was able to get a position as a youth minister at one of the local churches, which is, youth ministry is quite flexible because your hours are whenever kids are out of school, which really kind of helped me to be able to make a schedule where my husband and I could tag team, and we could make up the small differences in hours with random other babysitters. And so I have so much appreciation for St. Joseph for really praying for me in that situation. And of course, the Lord delivers. Jesus straight up gave me the exact job I needed at the exact time, because he's the bomb. So that novena really kind of helped me to open up to different positions and to look at things outside myself. Youth ministry is not something I had done before, so I was really just opening up my heart to wherever the Spirit was leading me, and hoping St. Joseph was praying for me at the same time. So that's one time where the novena really helped me out and answered a prayer. This is going to sound so silly in comparison, but this just goes to show you how silly we are sometimes. The second time that I leaned heavily on St. Joseph was because we now have 3 kids in a small apartment. And when we had our third, I prayed heavily that St. Joseph would somehow help us to get a house. And we're still pretty dirt poor. And there was just no way we were gonna afford to get into a house. It just was not really realistic, but I just wanted it so badly. And of course it wasn't answered, because I think if it had been, we would have ended up, you know, buried way over our head in something that we could not afford and weren't ready for. But at the time, I just felt angry about it. At the time, I just really wanted a house and felt like the Lord was keeping me trapped in this small apartment and giving me all these kids and not giving me the resources to provide for them. But now in retrospect, I'm realizing how we gotta kind of grow up. We gotta crawl before we can walk when it comes to something as big as that. So that prayer wasn't answered with the intention that I wanted, because the intention that I wanted was a house. But what was answered was an openness in my heart to recognizing that the answer is not yes. The answer is, hold up, not right now. So that's the beauty of novenas. They really just kind of help us focus on one thing that's really pressing in our life, and to just open them up for wherever the Spirit is leading us, within that intention or within that issue, within that relationship. So let's talk about how to pray a novena. So when starting a novena, we really should start with a special intention, because that'll help us to know what kind of novena we should do. So if there are any pressing matters in your heart, any urgent matters in your heart, think about what it is that you want to pray this novena for. And then look it up. Look up what kind of novenas you pray, you know. Google novena for a difficult marriage, novena for a wayward child, novena for financial struggles. There is a wealth of stuff out there. And my favorite is that there are apps. Specifically, there's an app called Pray, which will give you a daily reminder, tell you what day you're on, remind you every single day that you're doing this novena. It is so helpful. But even if you don't get an app for it, you have got to set reminders. You have got to set reminders so that you can actually remember to do it every single day. So my best tip is to do it at the same time every day. Whether or not you're an early morning prayer, right before bed prayer, do it at the same time every day, but set a reminder anyway, because even if you are an early morning prayer, you get into your prayer routine and realize, oh, in the morning I typically, you know, I do an Our Father, a Hail Mary, I offer up my day, done. And by days like 4 or 5, you might forget, oh, that's right, I'm also doing a novena. So set a reminder anyway. Even if you're doing it at the same time every day, and you know, with all your other prayers, set a reminder anyway. And ooh, I have some good notes here. Because another tip I would say is commit to learning about whatever kind of novena you're doing. So if you're doing a novena for the Immaculate Conception, it's so much easier to really open our hearts to these novenas when we commit to learning about, for example, the Immaculate Conception. And it really helps us to connect with the novena in a way that's really going to help us to gain from it, to gain even just spiritual graces, even if they have nothing to do with what we're praying about to begin with. And then of course, as I said, novenas are all about just opening your heart to however Jesus wants to lead us in the novena. You know, yes, we have a specific intention, but we also just want the novena to help us to really open our hearts to whatever the will of God is for that intention. And lastly, and what I think is the most important part of novenas, is to be grateful and to share the results or share what we've learned about those saints, to share them with our fellow brothers and sisters, because there's so much power that comes from these dedicated bursts of prayer that we have got to let our brothers and sisters know that there is such a thing and they can obtain all of these awesome graces from doing these novenas. I would really love to hear from all of you. What novenas have you done? Have you ever done a novena? What was the result of that novena? Who are your favorite novenas? Mine are, of course, St. Joseph, St. Jude, St. Rita for my husband, St. Michael. There's a lot of really, really good ones. So I would love to hear, what are some of your favorites? What have you experienced with novenas? And if you've never done any before, what kind draw to you? What are you drawn to start a novena? And also, if you are even remotely interested, start a novena today, because I promise you, you will not be disappointed. All right, so you go do that. I love you, sisters, and I'm praying for you. And please, please, please pray for me too.